Welcome.
Well, thank you for when you said between two ferns, you really meant between two ferns.
Panel discussion. No, absolutely, absolutely. So it's a tradition, as you know, of the Young Leaders Alumni Foundation and the organization to bring back eminent young leaders from the United States and then, in a way, drill them around what is happening in the US right now. So it's such a fantastic opportunity to have you both here. Thank you so much. I could read, for the next half an hour what your respective great achievements are, but I suggest let's start you off. Tell us, Bill.
All right, well, thank you, and thank you all for joining. It is truly an honor and pleasure to be here. I feel like I was just here. I was the class of 21, so it was in the November class that made it right before that little Omicron wave, and now I'm back again. It is just really incredible, and I'm so thankful to the foundation and the work that's happened. I have a few friends here on the front row that are lifelong friends because of our experience. Just over a week, it felt like a lifetime, though. My name is Bill Ferguson. I have the honor of serving as the president of the Maryland Senate. I was elected to the state Senate in 2010. Prior to that, I went to law school. I am a lawyer, but that's only on TV. I was actually a teacher, so I went to school to get into finance. Had a existential moment in my junior year and radically changed my life, and I joined a program called Teach for America, which is a program that takes those who would not otherwise be teachers and would be in other fields and puts them in some of the hardest to staff schools in the country. And so I landed myself in Baltimore, Maryland, where I taught 9th, 10th, and 11th graders U.S. history and U.S. government. That fundamentally changed who I am and what I believe and what I care about, and believe in the power of education to change the world. In 2010, it was sort of a mistake, an unexpected ran for state senate and served for 2 terms. And then in my 3rd term, again, sort of unexpected, our Senate president, who had been the Senate president for 33 years, had cancer, announced that he had cancer, and there was a race to replace him that I was not a part of. No one could win, and then I swept in and ended up taking it over. So it's been an incredible 3 years, an incredible experience, but most importantly, I am Leah's husband and CJ and Caleb's father. So that is me in a nutshell.
Bill, so wonderful to have gotten to know you in these few minutes, and let's just let it sink in again. President of the Maryland State Senate right now. Chris. Welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. My name is Chris Sprowls. I'm the Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives in the state of Florida. I, too, am glad to be back. I was in the class of 2019, and I can tell you I caught up with 5 or 6 of my classmates who are here tonight. And I can tell you one of the cool things about this program is we ran into each other. I'm super excited to have a drink with them later on tonight, because you're here for a week with relationships that last a lifetime. It's such a unique experience. And I think Marcus talked about the relationships between Switzerland and the United States, and so much of that happens here in a very personal way. I can tell you the 5 or 6 folks who are here tonight from my class, I have no idea, nor do I remember what their political beliefs are. But I do remember them as people, what they're interested in, their families, their kids, and that's sort of this personal relationship rather than the transactional relationships that so many people have together. So it's great to be with you. I also am a lawyer by trade. I grew up in Tampa Bay, grew up in the state of Florida. I was the son of a police officer. My dad was a homicide detective in the state of New York. They came down to Florida when I was 3 years old to visit and decided, why am I still living in New York when I can be here at the beach? And Bob's from the United States, so he got to laugh. And but they came down to the beach and decided to move to the state of Florida, and I grew up there. I went to law school. I became a gang and homicide prosecutor. I grew up on cop stories, so naturally I wanted to be part of that. So for 7 years, I had the opportunity to prosecute murder cases, particularly as it relates to gang crime. And learning about gang crime is a great segue into politics, especially in the United States. It's basically the same thing, right? There's colors and the whole deal. But I ran for the Florida House of Representatives in 2014 in the community that I grew up in. We have an interesting process in the state of Florida. We have term limits, but we select our leaders years out. So, as Bill was talking about his race and how it's, kind of cropped up at the last minute, we probably know that you're going to be the leader in the chamber about 6 years before you actually take the job, which most people think is very strange. The upside to it is you get a long runway to learn the budget process. We have a $112 billion budget in the state of Florida. So over those course of the years, I worked on a number of different issues ranging from healthcare, K-12 education, things like DNA, privacy, cybersecurity, so a wide range of issues. And these past 2 years, I've served as Speaker of the House. I too am married. My wife Shannon is a Vice President of Healthy Living at the YMCAs. Luckily, there's YMCAs throughout the world. I went into to the YMCA to work out one evening and left with a wife.
Yeah.
I met her there while at the gym, and we got married. We have 2 little boys. They're 5 and 6, Prescott and Conrad. It's great to be with you all.
Chris, fantastic to have you here. Maybe just to put things in perspective some more. Florida, 3rd biggest state in the US.
3rd largest state in the United States, 22 million
22
Floridians.
million Floridians, so just for the Swiss. Wonderful, wonderful. Now, we have 50 minutes, and in that we're going to look to tackle as many topics as possible, of course. We're going to talk about politics, we're going to talk about economics, we're going to talk about the jobs, landscape, education. We're going to talk about healthcare, tax, climate, domestic migration, supply chain. So you see, you're in for a ride tonight. Why am I mentioning these topics now? It's obviously we're looking to have your questions as well. So do consider at any moment when you feel, oh, that's something I'd like to, know a bit more about. Let me know, grab the microphone, and we will take you in. So not at the end, but happy to have you during the conversation. Let's get started, and let me share that yesterday afternoon, I looked at what is trending in the US on Twitter. Something that
That's
I like
dangerous.
to do every
I was
now and
gonna
then.
say, is
It's
that
dangerous,
accurate?
it's dangerous. So let me share, or maybe ask you, what do you think the top 5 trending topics were in the US?
The White House Correspondents' Dinner was probably big.
Interesting,
I was
interesting.
going to say something about Will Smith. There was some Will Smith stuff.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, I can share the most shared tweet was Sunday morning. Interesting, on a Sunday afternoon. The second one was Sunday vibes. Oh. By the way, I would think these are things that
these
bring...
are the actual hashtags.
The actual
Sunday
hashtags,
mornings.
yeah.
Okay.
The third one was, May Day. It was
May Day,
1st of May
labor
after all,
stuff.
so that made sense. And now I think we come to the Correspondents' Dinner, because the fourth one was Trevor Noah.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Would you have been at the Correspondents' Dinner, Sama? Do you have a
I was not
connection
invited.
there?
No,
You were not
Yeah, no.
invited. Well, we're still working on that. How about you?
Nor was I.
Also
That's the
not
Federals.
this time. There we go. And now I have to share the 5th one because it struck me. This is where, the Swiss. The 5th hashtag was #DailyQuartal97.
Oh, New York Times.
New York Times.
Yeah,
That is a
Quardle.
world puzzle, right?
Fascinating thing, though. I just heard an interesting... Should I just jump in?
You must. You must.
So Quardle, the reason that New York Times bought Quardle, and I think it was a pretty substantial acquisition, is that because the communication sector is in chaos and newspapers are trying to figure out their space, they have to find ways to get people to create the habit to show up every day. And so they purchased Quardle for this outrageous amount because it's one of these things that brings people to the site every day to create the habit for news. So I thought that was an interesting little fact.
Very interesting.
People are
If I
obsessed
look
with it.
around the room, who knows Quardle? Who uses it? One person. Well, there you go. I would say one of the fun facts that honestly hasn't made it to Switzerland. So let's see. Let's see. Let's jump into the politics first, right? And obviously, COVID has changed the landscape quite tremendously. So love to hear, maybe high level at this stage, in the states that you both represent, what would you say is the biggest impact in terms of... I'll look at you.
I think that I'll take one that maybe a lot of people aren't talking about, but I think has become a huge political issue in the United States, and that is K-12 education, right? So during COVID, their schools were closed. Depending on what part of the country you were in, it might have been closed for a short period of time. So for us, it was probably the last 2.5 to 3 months of our school year. For other places, it was a lot longer. But people were at home with their kids, which could have been stressful at times. I, for one, had a daddy preschool going on. I had a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, so my wife and I would sort of split the day. I would do like early morning to about noon. She would take over, and then I would work, the rest of the day. Why does that matter? It matters because I feel like during that period of time, parents started engaging or re-engaging in their children's education with an intensity that they had not done before. So a lot of the political issues that you've seen across the country are about parents' rights in education. You're seeing a lot of parents show up at school board meetings when that was usually a boring event. Now it can be an event that makes national news. So I think you've seen parents across the country kind of engage on these issues of education. That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I do think you've seen it sort of play out in our electoral politics.
Thank you, Chris. In your case, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe I'll just sort of put my sort of kind of landscape analysis out there out front. I mean, I think that we're in this unbelievably important moment for humanity. As we get to post-COVID, I think the experience that we've all been through over the last 2.5 years has radically changed who we are as a people and as a society. And a lot of the conversation has been about what happens post-COVID to return to normalcy or return to how things were. I'm sort of the fundamental belief that the world has changed and there are really deep contentious fights about what the future looks like. And in some ways it is, and I don't mean it as like a political statement, just that people had to really be very introspective and really rethink who they were and rethink what they cared about. And as we reemerge, I think there is this sort of rejection of going back to things that maybe previously people thought were okay, but now looking forward say, I don't want this moving forward. I've been in this kind of tribal, scared environment, and I want something different. And I think that's affecting every aspect of life. From education, which is absolutely happening in Maryland as well, from the workforce. I mean, workforce issues are unbelievable right now, the mismatch between skills and opportunity. We have this unbelievably rising inflation, an almost negligible unemployment rate. All of these forces are happening, and I do think it's funny that the hashtags were about Sunday morning, and there are these huge global crises happening, and the trending in the United States is like what I'm doing on Sunday today, right? I think that is a sign that people are sort of reflecting about day-to-day life again.
And I can tell you that's the case, not only in the US, but definitely for sure in Switzerland as well. I'd like to stay a little bit with that education piece, because, from the venture that I have, this is one of the areas that actually define the competitiveness of a country. And Bill, you've told us you're a teacher. So it would be fantastic to know how you've taken that into your political mandate. And maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so in Maryland, the thing about public education, people sort of think of it as a national education. In the United States, it's such a state by state, and there are definitely lessons learned. And Florida has some, remarkable outcomes with lots of different choice options. And in Maryland, we're a little bit less choice. We're more traditional. We have much more kind of a traditional structure of county-based school systems. The big challenge that we have in Maryland, which is a very, very wealthy state, one of the wealthiest states in the country, we had roughly, when you looked at kids who graduated from high school, which is the equivalency of university, just about 25% of them received a bachelor's or associate's degree or some industry recognized credential 6 years after they had left high school. 66% of the jobs that are created in Maryland require some sort of degree or credential in order to even apply. And so only 25% of Maryland high school graduates were achieving it. 66% of the jobs that are created require it. And that mismatch has been this fundamental problem. So we spent 3 years trying to review our system, comparing it to other systems globally. In fact, we looked at Switzerland. And so a year and a half ago, we passed what's called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is a 12-year plan. And one of the major components of that is this CT, Career and Technology Education component, looking at secondary, how can we make high school more relevant to the world of work? And actually, because of the trip to Switzerland that we did in November, this past year in our budget, we allocated $25 million specifically for apprenticeships in Maryland to figure out how to take them from outside of building trades to other industries. And so,
can I just stop here and pause and just the weight of what you've just said because of your trip to Switzerland?
No, it's totally the case. I mean, we put it in there,
fantastic.
And but we have to figure it out because Switzerland has the culture, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge in the States is people hear apprenticeship and they think building trades, they think plumbers and pipe fitters, and which is great, but they don't think insurance and biotech, and so shifting that culture is a major hurdle.
Unbelievable. And I mean, what a difference, I guess, indeed, this trip made, right?
It certainly, we hope so.
You got back to Maryland and you basically, told your peers this needs to be done?
Yes.
Reactions over there? Yeah, let's just love it. Chris, you shared with me that you have a grenade on your desk, right?
I do. I have a grenade. It doesn't work, but I have a grenade on my desk. So same actually as Bill, that I came back from Switzerland. There was this great program. They had done a panel on workforce education. Some of it had to do with high school credentialing. So I came back and started asking all kinds of questions, right? So we all have these entities in our states that receive federal money from the United States Congress, and it has all these strings attached about how we spend it to help people get jobs. Mostly it's terrible, right? There's all kinds of barriers for people to get jobs. It's really effective at spending money, not terribly effective at bringing people into the workforce and jobs they need. So like Bill, I thought, well, this is a huge problem that's impacting our ability to be competitive in a global marketplace. So the grenade that I put on my desk is a reminder. It was a reminder to me when I came back that we needed to blow things up and start over, that it wasn't working for people. And I'll give you an example. We brought in one of these entities that has hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money, and we asked them, what's your budget? Well, they knew down to the dime. Well, then we said, how many people have you helped get a job? And they didn't know, right? Not a good measure of success. So we did a couple things. We passed what we call the REACH Act, which really reoriented our entire system, blew up the structures, recreated it, focused on things like micro-credentialing. We had all of these government agencies, all of which had a job portal of some kind. So it's kind of like everybody's doing it, so it might as well have been no one, right? It's wildly confusing for someone who's sitting at home on their couch thinking about what can I do for a living to support my family. So we created this, what we call one-door entrance. So regardless of where you go now, you will end up into one place. All of this restructuring, this one-door entry was about a $250 million investment on part of the state. But we knew that wasn't going to be enough, right? So we had to start reorienting the incentives. So when you go to a college or university, or even in K-12 education, we pay for a diploma. We pay for a 4-year graduation, right? So the universities have incentives. They don't have incentives to get people these rapid credentials. So we changed that incentive structure so that they're rewarded for getting people in and out of the workforce, getting them micro-credentials. And then we set a goal for ourselves. We said, we called it Sail to 60, which is by the year 2030 to get 60% of our able-bodied workforce somewhere between a national rightly recognized industry certification to a higher education degree, with the goal in mind of preparing ourselves for the massive folks who are migrating to the state of Florida.
I am so impressed, I must tell you. And I think from now on, we really have to look out for Florida and Maryland, obviously, when it comes to that education landscape. 2 states with a plan, I would say, and a big discovery for me, for sure. After education, and I'm looking around the room if there's any question on that one specifically, let me move to the jobs topic, because it's very linked, and one terminology we keep hearing out of the United States is the great resignation piece, right? People who, notably because of COVID, are just not willing to return to the labor market. This has led, and is still leading, to immense skills shortages, to big problems and imbalances in your respective labor markets. Back to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you've just mentioned the plan that you have, so I'm assuming this all fits in there, but share with us some.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'll use this one point. I read this book probably right after I came back from Switzerland called Men at Work. And Men at
the
work.
Women?
Not the women, just the men, and I'll tell you why. Because it's the men who are out of the workforce in the United States.
Okay.
So the whole book was about how we are at the highest level of able-bodied men in the country who are not looking for work since the end of the Second World War in the United States. So what's interesting about that, because we talk about unemployment numbers, right? I mean, I'm sure just like in Maryland and the state of Florida, when we get good unemployment numbers, we sort of all celebrate, right? Look at this great unemployment. We're on Twitter, we're touting it. What it doesn't count, though, are the people who aren't looking for work. Mm-hmm. Many of whom are able-bodied and could re-enter the workforce. So when we talk about credentialing and things like that, those are the types of people, men and women, but able-bodied adults who are out of the workforce, maybe because they're discouraged, maybe because their job was eliminated through innovation, as how do we hook them into a career that can sustain them, that can help them provide for their family and provide them a little bit of easy access and hope. I mean, I think some of the feedback we get is it's so hard. I go try to find a job and I don't know what the hot jobs are in my area. So if I'm willing to go re-educate myself with a credential, well, where should I go if my goal is to try to provide for my family? Because I don't want to move across the country or across the state. I want to know what in the 15-mile radius is a good job. So those are the things we're tackling.
I would actually know a Swiss-based multinational who could help on that one.
All right, okay.
That's another topic. Fascinating. Great Resignation, Maryland.
I mean, it's without a doubt the case. I mean, we have it even in our own legislature. We have a Department of Legislative Services, which is our nonpartisan legislative staff, and we are desperately trying to hold on to them. And, it's lawyers and policy folks, but it is an employee's market, and I think people are shopping for opportunity, and they want to pick the right thing. They want the right circumstances. It's not just the money. I think it's the conditions of the workplace, the ability, the flexibility. So that's going to change at some point, I think, as with inflation, and at some point as interest rates go up, there's probably some slowing of the economy, and there's probably some rebalancing that happens. The thing that actually worries me the most about where at least Maryland is, but I would say this is probably the case for many states, is the last 2 years have sped up automation in a way that I think nobody could have really expected. The food delivery to alcohol delivery, everything that could be automated was, and I think that has shown this great value that can be created through automation. I think you look at Tesla and what's going to happen with commercial drivers and the potential of autonomous vehicles. I think there is something happening that will, in the next 5 to 7 years, you'll see significant numbers of occupations that were sort of standard middle-class jobs that just don't exist anymore. And I don't think we've sufficiently put into place. People don't want to hear retraining. They don't want to hear about getting new skills, even though it's absolutely critical. They don't want to. It's hard to think I've done this career. If I've done it for 10 years, now I have to go back to school to learn a totally different new thing. I just think that we're on this precipice, and the pandemic has just expedited this growing labor force dissatisfaction that's going to exist. We saw it with the coal industry. I mean, I think even in Maryland, we have a bit of the coal industry in Western Maryland, and communities are totally decimated. And the jobs are gone; they're never coming back. And communities are trying to reinvent themselves, and it just takes time. And I don't feel like we have the plans in place that are needed to counteract what can be large social unrest, unease. And I think that's sort of what you're seeing in the politics too. I think there is this general sense out there of something's not right. There's something that's not quite right, and I can't figure out why, and I'm scared for my kids and what their future looks like. And that's that unease that I think is kind of permeating a lot of the politics.
Can I add something to that? I think I agree with everything Bill said. I also think that one of the huge buckets of people that we're missing in the United States that are in these traditional workforces, including these credentials, are people who never graduated from high school. And what we found in Florida, and I think this is a national statistic, is that if you take the people who don't graduate from high school in the United States, 88% of them were struggling readers in third grade. Now, that's a pretty good statistics. We got a lot of data analytics people in here, right? So if I told you, hey, in third grade, we have a pretty good sense if we're going to lose somebody before they graduate from high school. They're not reading on grade level. Then we say, okay, well, what do we know about struggling readers? 60% of struggling readers in the United States don't own a book in their home, don't have access to a book. Well, how can you learn to read if you don't have access to a book when you're not at school? So we wanted to address that in part as a way, obviously we want children to read. Here we are in Switzerland where the adult literacy rate is 99%. That's not the case in the United States. So how do we do that? We created this New Worlds Reading Initiative. It's the largest home book delivery program of any state in the United States, where we deliver to those struggling readers a book to their home, Amazon package. It's on grade level. It's directly to them. Their parents receive a text message communication saying, little Jimmy got a book about space because he said he was interested in space. Here's how you, as a mom or dad or a grandma, grandpa, can help him read this book. Here's content for the parents to engage them. So we're working on trying to get ahead of the future workforce problem by making sure that we have more kids who are reading on grade level.
Love it. Now, I could stay on this topic for hours, but I will spare you that. Just one last question, and I'm looking in the room again. We've heard about those multi-billion dollars investments of Swiss companies, right, in the US, and about all these jobs that are linked to Swiss employers operating there. Do you have visibility in Florida around those Swiss-related jobs? And in Maryland?
I don't know if I know specific. I mean, I have a general sense of some of the larger corporations that are investing in Maryland. I know some of our biotech with Johns Hopkins has been with Roush and a number of other Genentech, and but I don't know specifically.
Okay.
I also think we're a recipient too of the industry coming. I was speaking to some of the Swiss Re folks about reinsurance, which is a huge deal for us in the state of Florida. Come June 1st, everyone's going to be buying their reinsurance. So for us, that's an extremely important thing. So the idea that we have one of the largest reinsurers in the world who's doing business in the state of Florida is a marketplace game changer for us.
Let's turn to politics, and let me share a perception on the Swiss side, and you might have seen it as well. The perception is that somehow US politics are constantly about fights and battles and, obviously that big conflict between the two big parties and their representatives. Now, is this also the case at state level? How does it look like in Florida?
Nothing like what you see on TV. Right?
Really?
Nothing like it at all. And I'll be surprised if Bill disagrees, but we have, it's usually wildly bipartisan. Things are not as contentious as they are in DC. I think DC is sort of made to be broken, almost on purpose.
Interesting.
And so I don't think we experience that, although I do think you're starting to see, at least for us in the state of Florida, for the first time, some of that mentality is beginning to creep down, but certainly doesn't have a stranglehold yet.
Yeah, and in Maryland, we're a very heavily Democratic state, so we have a supermajority of Democrats in the House and the Senate, and we have a Republican governor. And so, there's a number of reasons why I think we don't see it as much, but I think probably the first and foremost is that we have to balance our budget every year, and it's constitutionally required. And so it forces us, we have a 90-day session, and we have to balance the budget. There's a one constitutional duty, and so it sort of forces everybody. You can posture as much as you want, but at the end of the day, we have a job to do, and so it forces people to get around a table and get it done. But it's also, I think, the states are where it's really happening. I mean, the news is covering. You could not pay me enough money to run for federal office. I wouldn't. And you can mark it down now. It is. I mean, it is just so broken. And we have some former state senators that are in Congress now that sort of harken back to the days when they were back in the state legislature. I just think we can see our work a lot easier. It's closer to home. It's easier to see. I think it's a structural problem in the U.S. that's going to have to be figured out here in one way or another. I think the constant flipping of back and forth is going to be probably. So this is where I would say there are big changes ahead. I don't know what they look like. Mm-hmm. I just think as people are starting to rethink their own world post-pandemic, politics and our system of government is probably in some way a component of that. I mean, we're seeing it with redistricting fights across the country. There's just this, something is not working, and the wheels have to start spinning again somehow.
Well, looking forward, and probably will bring you back to Switzerland so you get more inspiration on.
No, I mean, look,
right?
I think one of the other interesting, I thought it was the four political parties when we were in, that I thought was so fascinating.
The magic formula, that's
very
what
fascinating.
It's called, yeah?
Because, our system is built up of white, black, Republican, Democrat. It's like one or the other, and that's just not how people are. People are more complex than that. And so I think that there is, I don't know what the alternative looks like, but my sort of sense of the world is that the political party structure has created real tensions that I don't know how that lasts in the long haul.
Yeah, a space to watch for sure. And it's been going on for quite a while right now. With the perception, again, around politics, be correct that it seems as if politics is the new national religion, though, in the United States, right? I think it's a term that, we discussed when we prepared for today. So,
and I think that's right. I mean, I've said that before, that it feels like politics is becoming, whether it's your national sport. Mm-hmm. Zurich won a big football game, yesterday, right?
Don't mention that.
Oh.
Just so you know.
Who'd they beat?
I can tell you the folks at the Swiss Re desk were very excited.
Well, what can I say?
But no, I think
I'm
that's
from
true.
Basel, so.
I think you're starting to see more Americans are split down the middle on darn near everything, right? That they're fighting at Thanksgiving and not in a healthy way. And so I think it is sort of becoming part of our national fabric that we have to fight about politics about everything. There's sort of, red team, blue team. But I also kind of attribute it to something and I'll use this one as an example because I think it's a contrast between, Swiss culture from my observation and the United States, and that is fame culture, right? So kids who are growing up right now, so school-age kids in the United States, you know what their number one job ask is? What do you want to be when you grow up? And they do a poll.
Influencer.
Yeah, YouTube influencer.
There you go.
YouTube influencer, number one. Now, when I was a kid, it was like, I want to be a doctor, an astronaut, a pilot, right? Now it's a YouTube influencer. So we have fame culture.
Yeah.
Right? You open the newspaper, it's famous people on the front. I open up a Swiss, newspaper, no famous people on the front except for Marcus occasionally.
Of course, I was just going to say.
Who, by the way, is like the Iron Man of Swiss banking. You think he's done, and then he just keeps going. Right? But so I think fame culture has really infected our politics. So now you're seeing people who run for office really to be famous. And the irony is, going back to the state legislature, we sort of have the opposite job, right? We get to go up for a 90-day session, and we can do amazingly big things for our states in a really short period of time. We go home, we're in the supermarket, most people don't know who we are. Our federal
politics,
Our federal politics, they go up to Washington for God knows how long, can't get a darn thing done, and then they come home and everybody knows who they are, right? So it's sort of the opposite problem.
It's totally true. I mean, it's totally true. It should be boring.
New national religion,
I'm
the
good
church.
at boring. I'm very good at boring.
You're very good, I would say, yes.
So that's what I prefer, the politics. It's I just think, we've turned it into the fight. The fight is more important than the outcome, and I think that's the problem.
Well, I'm very confident.
At a national level. I think it is, again, at a state level, I think it is at a much different place, and that's why, when I think about folks who are thinking about investing in the U.S. and you say, I'm going to invest in the U.S., my first question would be, well, where? Because it is a very, very different experience if you're investing in Nevada or Maryland or Florida or California. It's just the state level impact, I think, is only growing because as things have been stuck at the federal level, states have had to really step up and define sort of their local priorities more so.
Well, I'm very confident with representatives like yourself, that shift is something that we can witness in the coming years. Dear friends, any question on the political spectrum? Yes, thank you very much. Let us see the microphone. Thank you so much.
We combine politics and education quickly and ask both of you, do you favor adding civics to middle school or high school curriculum?
Yes, I don't know if we could agree what civics are these days. That would be my fear. I don't know what the curriculum would be. And I think that's something that I really worry about is that we've one of the challenges in the United States, I think, is that we've stopped having a common language and everything, words mean different things to different people. And I think that has created a real challenge for defining what exactly is civic. Is civic protest? Is it civic, Pledge of Allegiance? I think that's one of the challenges that we have.
It's a great question. So yes, I do. I think Bill's right? What does that mean? And you might get different answers from different people. We've did all the things over the years in Florida, like you have to teach our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, all of those things you'd expect. It didn't really work the way that we wanted it to. We took a different approach. When I came in as speaker, I sort of looked at this issue and thought, okay, there's some sort of breakdown, right? Either the kids think it's boring or it's not being taught the way that we'd want it to be taught, but it's not getting into the culture. You saw a rise in the United States where certain political philosophies had gotten a higher level of percentage of support than they ever had in the history of the U.S. So we took that as sort of an alarming sign. We passed a bill in Florida called Portraits of Patriotism. And the idea struck me when I was at the National Holocaust Museum in the United States. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but they have these interviews. They banked thousands and thousands of interviews with Holocaust survivors. And they can pop up on a hologram, and it's the person that they interviewed. And school-age children can ask them questions, spontaneously. Well, were you in a concentration camp? Where were you? What kind of food did you eat? Do you believe in God? All of these different questions, and there's this bank of answers, because they interview these people. So I thought maybe that's the thing that we need to teach children, this kind of shared philosophy of what it means to be an American. So we passed this bill called Portraits of Patriotism. What it does is the same thing, except it interviews survivors of totalitarian regimes who fled to the United States. It interviews them about their story, why they came to the US, why freedom was important to them, all of those things, so that we can bring it directly to school-age children so that they can interact with the person without the various, human filters that naturally exist inside a classroom.
Love it. Thank you so much for the question. Another question, dear friends? So let me move to yes, please. Waiting for the microphone, it's coming.
Thank you very much. So I'm having a question related to this functionality in Washington that you have been describing. So I'm not a political scientist, but as an outside observer, one notion is that this functionality might be a bit linked to the deeper election system on a national level in the US. So if you have such a strong presidency and you have this voting system that basically enforces a bipolar system, there are some, let's say, structural reasons why you might end up in a situation that you are in at the moment. Maybe there's other elements, but as an outside observer, it looks a bit like that. So my question to you is, are there any fundamental discussions that you are sensing within the US to actually make this root cause analysis and actually challenge some of these fundamental structures and elements of the US democracy, or is that so strongly enshrined in your constitution and everything that no one is really touching that, and everyone's just talking about, let's say, the symptoms and how to fix them?
Thank you so much. The easy questions, I see.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
First of all, he's very smart because he was a 2019 young leader. So that's why he's so bright.
No pressure, 21.
Yeah. It's a great question. So here's what I would say. I think I get that question a lot, even in the United States, right? Why don't we just sort of blow this thing up and start over? It's not really working for us. I think it worked for a really long time, right? The two-party system, has existed, since before Abraham Lincoln. So it's been around for a while. I think it is sort of the incentives that exist now inside the structure, right? So nobody's going to be happy. No party is rarely going to reflect the total values of an individual person. But I think for a very long time, there was a spirit of cooperation. There was a spirit of getting things done, and even in Washington, that doesn't exist today. So let's just take those two things. Why did it sort of work here, but now it doesn't work? And I think what happened is, now you have members of Congress who, want to be famous, right? So if the incentive is, I want to go on TV every night, how do I get on TV every night? Well, if I'm a Democrat, I say no to everything and I get on CNN, MSNBC, right? If I'm a Republican, maybe I say no to everything and I get on, the conservative news stations, right? So there becomes this incentive structure that exists to not try to achieve a common purpose for the American people. And I think those structures are the ones that I would say, how do you reform those things? And that's tough to do. I mean, the cat is kind of out of the bag when it comes to, the media and how that works. I do think you're going to see some needed changes in Washington structurally, right? I think there's very little incentives. Take it Nancy Pelosi, right, the Speaker of the House. So she has my job, but on a national scale. She doesn't pick the committee chairs that exist in Washington, D.C. She doesn't pick a lot of the structure. She can't help people out when they need to build a bridge, inside their community. So I think a lot of those things that kind of kept people together and working for a common purpose don't exist anymore. And I think you're starting to see some of them kind of come back into the fabric because there's just literally no ability to get people on the same plan to accomplish a goal.
Mm-hmm. Bill, is that what we see?
Yeah, I certainly agree with the analysis. I would say I don't know that our constitutional structure was built like this. I mean, Article 1 of the Constitution is about the legislative branch, right? We were supposed to be a legislative branch-driven society, and I think over the years we've become a much more presidential-dominated society. And so the challenge with that is it becomes winner take all. If that person's on my team, then I'm with them. If they're not on my team, I'm against them. And I think the beauty of Article 1 is compromise. That was the whole idea, is that you have to compromise to get something done. Now compromising is a dirty word. It's like you don't actually have values. You are a bad person. Not just we have different ideas about something, but you are a bad person because we disagree. And so I don't know. This is something that keeps me up at night. I don't know what it looks like to reinstill the power of compromise as the foundational principle as to how our country was created. And so, I wish I knew. This is one that I really think about at night often, is just how do we reinstill this idea that it's okay to not get everything you want and to get some of what you want, and that's moving the ball down the field.
Yeah.
But I think the states are a good example.
Yeah, I mean,
of how
that's
to do
where it is
that.
happening.
Power of compromise.
Yep.
Swiss virtue, actually, I can tell you that much. All right, let me move on to another easy topic. Healthcare.
Again, state by state.
COVID-19, ravaged, right, through the healthcare sector. State by state, tell us what it did to Maryland.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't say, certainly with the Affordable Care Act, it's become a lot more of a national baseline. But state by state, each marketplace is state regulated, state driven. COVID destroyed our hospitals and the workforce. I mean, that is probably the single biggest challenge on workforce ends. Nurses, nurse practitioners, lab techs, you name it. And these are good paying jobs that frontline workers have just said, I'm going to something else, this was too hard. So we have a major workforce shortage in our hospital sector. I'm quite attuned to it because in Baltimore City we have these massive hospitals, research university hospitals that really drive our economy, and they are really, really struggling on the workforce end. Still, I think we have too many that are uninsured that create pricing impacts throughout the entire system. But I think there's been improvements. I think we're very blessed to have great innovation in our healthcare system. I believe that we have this sort of blended version that helps us to have the incentive to invest in research and technology, as well as ensure that everyone has a basic level of care. So I think that costs are high, pharmaceutical costs are high, and that's something we're going to continue to be working on. But for the most part, I feel like in Maryland, we are very fortunate.
Well, good to hear. By the way, on that one, on the workforce in the healthcare center, I mean, I know from staffing agencies that specialize in the healthcare sector, where nurses are now shifting away from hospitals and looking to work for agencies. They can charge up to $400,000 US a year, right?
Hopkins was charging $285 an hour for nurses.
Yeah, so a very incredible shift in that perspective. You said that the hospitals are flushed with money.
That does sound like something I would say.
Tell us more.
Look, COVID was obviously an extremely difficult time for hospitals, not just care of patients. You talked about staffing shortages, terrible problem, right? People were out either because they had COVID, a relative had COVID, they were exposed to COVID. But it was also one of the most profitable times that hospitals, at least in the state of Florida, have ever had. So, what we've tried to do in the legislature, which has been true for a while when it comes to hospitals, is open up the marketplace as much as possible, create competition. In the United States, there's no deals on healthcare, right? It's not like you open the newspaper and it says, if you need a knee replacement, I'll give you 2 for the price of 1, right? Like that doesn't happen, right? There's no marketplace. So we've tried to, through whether it was, the expansion of telemedicine or various different regulatory structures that we've taken down, try to open up the marketplace to give people, more consumer choice. I think on the nursing issue, there's no way to compete with those costs, with the traveling nurses that you mentioned. So what we try to do is now just try to flood the marketplace with additional nurses. So, we've done a couple different things and, making sure that we're increasing nursing education. We also put a bunch of money on the table and said to our hospital partners who we know have a little bit of money on their hands, hey, if you guys put dollar for dollar, we'll match you. So if you put, $1 million into a program at a local college to produce nurses that ideally will come work for your hospital, we will put $1 million from the state of Florida, the taxpayer, on the table as a way to incentivize a partnership between the state and private industry to create more nurses into the marketplace.
Another program that makes so much sense.
I had a moment.
Putting money on the table is usually
helpful.
A good one.
Generally, although I would say nurses, for what's funny is that money hasn't been able to solve the problem. I mean, it sort of has, but because of the credentialing and licensing, the hospitals have had money. They've not been able to get the workforce. I did want to amend something about the healthcare marketplace, though, in Maryland. The mental health care access is not even remotely close to where it needs to be post-COVID. And I would say, in my mind, the single biggest impact, and I would say probably globally, but certainly I'll just stick with what I know in Maryland. I think the long tail of this is the mental health crisis that exists and finding ways to expand access, particularly for young kids. And I think that they have been so impacted by the virtual learning, the kind of shutdown of all the programs, the social emotional stunted growth that happened over a year and a half, that I think that this is really the long story is what is the mental health stability of our populace, and I think we have a long way to go. And Maryland has incredible providers, but the system, we do somatic health well. We know how to treat a knee replacement. We do not treat mental health crises in a way that makes coherent sense. It is the Wild West. You deal with who you know. There's not a good system of clear next step to the, this is the upwards trajectory, downwards trajectory. It is a very free-for-all marketplace that I think really, something that I'm increasingly more passionate about getting deeper into.
Incredible, and I can only say from my venture point, I don't think any country actually has gotten that one right. It's quite a recent development, isn't it? Healthcare sector, dear friends, questions? Because we will be moving to another topic, which is around domestic migration, and here it's really around, are people staying in Maryland? And I mean,
we're sort of a middle. Certainly, Florida is a recipient state. I think we are growing. We stay with 8 Congresspeople. We stayed at 8 Congresspeople, so we grew at the average for the country. We import a lot of more highly educated people because of the federal government and healthcare sectors. And so a lot of people that come to Maryland come with higher education degrees. But we're sort of in the middle. It's not like New York and California who are seeing kind of the other direction.
Because you see that, right? I mean, there are huge movements of people across the country.
Hugely so. More so now in a more remote world. People are going where they want to live.
Clearly. Interesting. Yeah. How do you see that in Florida?
Yeah, well, I mean, we lead the nation in Florida in domestic migration, right? So we're the largest recipient of Americans who are moving to a state. More of a significant portion of them are coming to Florida. There's great parts of that, right? So every time we've done our budget review as our estimate, it gets bigger and bigger, right? So we thought it was going to come in, at a particular number a few weeks ago, and it came in $650 million over, that number. A large portion of that is because of all of these individuals who are deciding to make Florida their home, which is awesome. I also think it's interesting is that the types of folks we're getting are different, right? So if you were in Florida when I was growing up, 25 years ago, Florida in the U.S. was like the carrot at the end of the life well lived, right? It's like, congratulations, you've retired. We're very happy. You're going to move to the villages in Florida. You're going to build yourself a house, and you're going to play golf, right? That was sort of the model. That's not true anymore. I mean, we're seeing mass industry.
Where do people go then?
They're coming up. Well, they're still coming to Florida to retire, but they're coming sooner, right? They're not. They're coming in the middle of their career, and not at the end at their retirement. So we've seen massive influx of everything from manufacturing to hedge funds who've moved to Florida in the last 12 months, and that's been a different sort of migration than we're used to.
Interesting impacts with climate change too. I mean, I think that's going to be this other. Because Maryland is certainly susceptible to, the sea level. We are a very water-driven state, and we are seeing the beginnings of challenges of our waterfront communities really starting to face and own up to lack of resiliency and flooding and more severe storms. Oddly, in the midst of where we have kind of this energy price crisis, these competing values of kind of dealing with sustainability of dealing with climate change. On the other hand, surging prices that I think people in their pocketbooks are saying, we got to do what it takes to lower prices. And those two things often are not symbiotic. But I think that it's something in Maryland, I know that we're really trying to think through climate change policy. We did a big bill this year, so it's on my mind. And it was tough. It was very hard because I think there's an agreement that the climate is changing. What we do to fix it, especially as a single state, is a harder question to answer.
And again, want to set the future path. Dear friends, 2 more questions from my side. I'm looking into the audience again. So let me start with my second last question, and that has to be around the supply chain issues out there. So in both your states, there's major ports. And so the question, of course, what have those impacts been of the supply chain crisis? And also, is there still enough American to buy? Not
in my opinion. There should be more, but we're working on that. I'll say two things. I think one, we're suffering from the same shortages that everybody else is, right? So I opened the newspaper while I was here this morning, and it said, now the lack of trucks in supply has surpassed the problem and the deficit of drivers. Right now, the problem is we can't get the trucks, we have the drivers because of the chips and all of the things that make supply low on cars and so forth. So I think that continues to be an issue, and that's making construction projects, which is a big industry in the state of Florida, much more expensive. Getting supply is costing everything more. Financial institutions are having to come back and loan additional money to complete a project that's already underway. So we're seeing some of that. But from a supply chain side, we have benefited a bit, right, from this, in the sense that because of COVID, there were states like, California who had shut down their ports and had sort of these tankers of cargo languishing off the coast. So we sort of did like an ad campaign, right? Like, come to Florida, our ports are open for business. So, our ports are up as a result of that sort of contrast. So, we have been a benefit even during a difficult time of getting more people, importing into the state of Florida and using our ports of entry.
Interesting.
Yeah, our port has been booming. We have a lot of automobiles, so we have roll-on, roll-off cargo. We are huge for farm equipment and automobiles. The chip problem has created a bit of an issue with the ro-ro traffic, but container ships have been really strong. The challenge is that the pricing for container shipments has just skyrocketed. I mean, like 300% increases in some cases for shipping from East Asia to the port of Baltimore, or from South America to Baltimore. I think there is a desire to see more onshoring of creation of made in the United States. The problem is our goods are so sophisticated that they go so many different places before you get to that finished product. So I believe that globalization is here to stay. I think we have to manage it more effectively than we have. I'm hopeful that it is, because the Port of Baltimore is a huge driver for the state of Maryland. So it's important that it keep going. But it does. I think it is having some social costs. I do think it's a part of sort of what we've seen, and the impact on immigration and all of these factors sort of all play into each other.
I agree.
Gentlemen, we're almost there. And just to close the circle, and everybody knows it, we love to always finish off with a question around the impact of that week that you've spent. And you've shared, of course, already some elements there, which I think we all took note of with great interest. But maybe just to come back to those shared values of liberty, the rule of law, free enterprise. Let us know how this week has changed your life.
Look, it was a phenomenal week. And it was easy to come back because it was just, there are remarkable people. I see my good friends here in the front row that there are not many places. We sort of joked that it was like adult summer camp, but it had that feel because there's not many times, especially with kids and all the other responsibilities, that you can sort of just let go and have fascinating conversations about the world and about the future, and get a moment to just step back and think, wow, there are some remarkable people across the globe, and there's the opportunity to really do some great things together. So it was an incredibly impactful trip for me, and I'm so honored and grateful to have been able to partake.
Fantastic that you came back. Yeah. Chris?
Well, I don't know about you, but after Patricia fed us for that week, I had a diet for about a year, I think. Look, I think it's such a unique experience to be in a foreign country where you're with folks who are from that country and get to bond with them in a really significant way. So in addition to the policy big takeaways that we brought back and sort of imported to the United States and tried to replicate some of the things that you did. So when we had our policy staffs get together and work on, workforce or, some of these other issues, sea level rise, climate change, those things, we looked at, what is Switzerland doing and how can we replicate what works for our system that's similar. And our two nations are very similar and very compatible with each other. I think that's why we're such great trading partners. But I think the personal is probably the most important to me, right? Like I feel like now sort of for life, I have this personal affinity for Switzerland. And that is in part because it is a beautiful country. I loved visiting here. The food was great. The scenery was great. But really it has to do with, I have friends here, right? There's not a lot of foreign countries where I say I've got a handful of friends who I feel like if I'm here, I could call them or I could reach out to them when I'm at home. So I think having a personal affinity for a nation is sort of a unique thing, certainly for being an American. So I think that was probably the most special part.
Love it. Well, Chris, Bill, thank you so much again for having taken the time, for having shared those insights, which I think were absolutely unique in terms of, how they gave us a window into your respective activities, of course, your respective mandates. Delighted, of course, to hear the impact this week had. I think I speak on behalf of everybody here, the young leaders here. Yes, you do have friends here, so don't hesitate. So from my side, all I'm left to do is again to thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, wish everybody a lovely continuation of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.